The morning sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as Tyson Williams stepped onto his front porch, coffee mug in hand. At 34, he had built what most would call a perfect life. His landscaping business thrived, employing 12 locals from their tight-knit community of Riverside. His wife, Sarah, taught third grade at the elementary school, and their twin daughters, Maya and Lily, were the stars of the neighborhood soccer league. Everyone knew Tyson as the guy who shoveled elderly Mrs. Patterson's driveway without being asked, who organized the annual block party, and whose hearty laugh could be heard echoing from backyard barbecues on summer evenings. But perfection, Tyson had learned, was as fragile as morning frost. The call came at 7:23 a.m., just as he was reviewing work orders for the day. His phone buzzed against the kitchen counter, displaying his brother Marcus's name. Marcus never called this early unless something was terribly wrong. "Ty, you need to sit down." Marcus's voice cracked through the speaker. "What's going on?" Tyson set down his mug, his stomach already knotting with dread. "It's Mom. The doctors, they found something. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She's got maybe 3 months." The words hit like a physical blow. Tyson's legs gave out, and he sank into the nearest chair. Their mother, Eleanor Williams, had been the cornerstone of their family for 67 years. She had raised 5 boys single-handedly after their father died in a construction accident when Tyson was 12. She worked 3 jobs to keep them fed and housed, never missing a school play or baseball game. The woman who seemed invincible, who had weathered every storm life threw at her family, was suddenly fragile and mortal. "The insurance won't cover the experimental treatment," Marcus continued, his voice hollow. "We're talking about $200,000, Ty. Money we don't have." Tyson's mind raced. His business account held maybe $30,000. His retirement fund had another 40. Even if he liquidated everything, it wouldn't be enough. Not nearly enough. The next few hours passed in a blur. He drove to the hospital, held his mother's hand as she tried to stay strong for her sons, and watched her eyes cloud with the same helpless frustration that had consumed their father years ago. On the drive home, desperation crept in like fog rolling off the river. By evening, as he sat in his darkened living room after Sarah and the girls had gone to bed, an idea began to form. A terrible, necessary idea. The Riverside Community Bank sat on the corner of Main and First, a modest brick building where Tyson had opened his first checking account at 16, where he had gotten his business loan 5 years ago, where Janet Morrison, the branch manager, always asked about the girls and complimented Sarah's cookies at the school fundraisers. It would be easy. He knew their security system was outdated. He knew their patterns, their routines. Most importantly, he knew they kept a substantial cash reserve for the Friday payroll runs to the local factories. Tyson had never stolen so much as a candy bar in his life, but as he stared at the family photo on his mantel, he realized some lines were meant to be crossed. His mother had sacrificed everything for them. Now it was his turn. The plan crystallized over the following days. He would make it look like an outside job, someone unfamiliar with the community. He would take only what he needed for the treatment, nothing more. He would find a way to pay it back eventually, somehow. These weren't the thoughts of a criminal, he told himself. These were the thoughts of a son who refused to watch his mother die when he had the power to save her. On Thursday evening, as rain drummed against the windows, Tyson sat at his kitchen table with blueprints spread before him. Not architectural drawings for a landscaping project this time, but hand-sketched floor plans of the bank. Security camera locations. Escape routes. The weight of what he was planning settled on his shoulders like a lead blanket, but the alternative was unbearable. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her hair tousled from sleep. "Honey, what are you doing up so late?" He quickly covered the papers with a working voice. "Just planning tomorrow's jobs. Go back to bed." She studied his face in the dim kitchen light, concern creeping into her voice. "You've been different since you visited your mom. Talk to me." Tyson wanted to tell her everything, wanted to collapse into her arms and let her share this impossible burden. But he couldn't drag her into this darkness. She was good, pure in a way that made the world make sense. If he told her what he was planning, she would either try to stop him or, worse, offer to help. He couldn't allow either. "I'm fine," he lied. the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Just worried about her, that's all. As Friday morning dawned gray and cold, Tyson kissed his sleeping daughters goodbye, lingering at their bedside longer than usual. Maya stirred, opening sleepy eyes that looked exactly like her mother's. "Daddy, where are you going so early?" "Just to work, sweetheart. I love you." "Love you too, Daddy." Walking down the hallway, Tyson realized those might be the last normal words his daughter would ever speak to him. By tonight, he would either be a hero who saved his mother's life, or a criminal who destroyed his family's future. There was no middle ground in what he was about to do. The die was cast. In 6 hours, Tyson Williams would walk into Riverside Community Bank and change everything forever. The morning air bit through Tyson's jacket as he sat in his pickup truck across from the Riverside Community Bank. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white, and his breathing came in short, controlled bursts that fogged the windshield. He had been parked here for 20 minutes, watching the familiar Friday routine unfold before him like a choreographed dance he knew by heart. At exactly 8:45 a.m., Janet Morrison's silver Honda pulled into the manager's spot. She climbed out, juggling her purse, coffee cup, and the morning deposit bag, just as she had every Friday for the past 3 years. 2 minutes later, Tommy Ricci arrived in his rusted Ford, stubbing out a cigarette before entering through the employee door. Tommy worked security, though everyone in town knew he was more interested in crossword puzzles than watching monitors. Tyson's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Mom asking for you. Can you come by after work?" The message felt like a knife twisting in his chest. After work. As if he would still have work after today. As if anything in his life would ever be the same. He typed back. "Tell her I'll see her soon." It wasn't a lie. If this went according to plan, he would see her very soon, with hope in his eyes and a treatment plan in his hands. If it didn't go according to plan, well, he might be seeing her from behind prison glass. At 9:15, Tyson pulled the ski mask from his glove compartment. The black wool felt foreign against his skin, transforming him from Tyson Williams, respected businessman and father, into someone else entirely. Someone capable of what came next. The bank's interior was exactly as he remembered. Soft lighting, burgundy carpet worn thin from decades of foot traffic, and the faint smell of Janet's vanilla air freshener. 3 teller windows, though only 2 were open on Friday mornings. Linda Patterson worked the first window, Mrs. Patterson's daughter-in-law, who always asked about his girls. Rebecca Santos worked the second, a young mother who had just bought her first home with a loan Tyson had helped her understand. These weren't strangers. These were neighbors, people who knew his name, his family, his reputation. The weight of that realization nearly sent him back to his truck, but then he thought of his mother's tired eyes, of the hope dying in them day by day, and he pushed through the glass doors. "Good morning," Linda called out cheerfully, then stopped mid-sentence as she registered the mask, the tense set of his shoulders, the way his hands shook despite his efforts to control them. "I need you to stay calm," Tyson said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. He had practiced these words, but actually speaking them felt surreal, like he was watching someone else's nightmare unfold. "I don't want to hurt anyone." Rebecca's hand moved toward the silent alarm button, and Tyson quickly stepped closer to the counter. "Please don't. I know where that button is. I know this place. Just give me what's in the vault, and I'll be gone." Janet Morrison emerged from her office, having heard the commotion. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and then something that looked almost like disappointment. She knew. Somehow, she knew it was him. "The vault requires 2 keys," Janet said quietly, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Mine and Linda's." "Then get them." What happened next would replay in Tyson's mind for years to come. Linda's hands trembled as she reached for her keys, and the metal slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor behind the counter. As she bent to retrieve them, her elbow caught the edge of a coffee cup sitting on the counter. The cup fell, shattering against the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo forever in the suddenly silent bank. The noise triggered something primal in everyone present. Rebecca let out a small scream. Tommy Ricci came running from the back office, saw Tyson in the mask, and fumbled for his radio. Janet stepped protectively in front of her employees, even though she was facing down a robber. "Please," she said, and Tyson heard genuine concern in her voice. Not fear for her own safety, but worry for him. "Whoever you are, you don't want to do this. It's not too late to walk away." But it was too late. It had been too late the moment he learned his mother was dying. Too late when the insurance company denied coverage. Too late when he realized that being a good man, a law-abiding citizen, meant watching the most important person in his life fade away while he stood helplessly by. "Open the vault," he repeated, though his voice cracked on the words. The next few minutes passed like a fever dream. Janet and Linda walked him to the vault, their keys turning in unison. The heavy door swung open, revealing neat stacks of bills secured with paper bands. Tyson had brought a canvas bag, the same one he used for garden tools, and began filling it with methodical precision. Not all of it, he told himself. Just enough. Just what he needed to save his mother. $200,000 looked smaller than he had expected. It fit easily in his bag, though the weight seemed to pull him toward the earth with every step. As he turned to leave, Janet spoke again. "I hope you get whatever you need," she said softly. "And I hope you find peace with whatever drove you to this." Tyson met her eyes through the mask, and for a moment the careful distance between criminal and victim collapsed. She wasn't looking at a dangerous stranger. She was looking at someone's son, someone's father, someone whose world had crumbled enough to bring him to this moment. "Thank you," he whispered, the words barely audible. Walking back through the bank lobby felt like moving underwater. Every step stretched into eternity. His truck waited exactly where he had left it, engine still warm, ready to carry him away from this moment and into whatever came next. As he drove through the streets of Riverside, Tyson realized he was crying behind the mask, not from guilt or fear, but from relief. He had done it. He had crossed the line that separated desperate from dangerous, and somehow everyone was safe. His mother would live. His girls would have their grandmother at their graduations, their weddings, the birth of their own children. The mask came off at the first red light, and Tyson Williams looked at himself in the rearview mirror. The face staring back was the same one that had kissed his daughters goodbye that morning, but something fundamental had changed. The man who had entered that bank no longer existed. In his place sat someone new. Someone who had learned that love and desperation could transform even the most ordinary person into someone unrecognizable. His phone rang. Marcus again. "Ty, where are you? Mom's asking for you. She wants to talk about funeral arrangements." Tyson smiled through his tears, gripping the canvas bag tight against his chest. "Tell her we're not talking about funerals anymore. Tell her we're talking about beating this thing." The light turned green, and Tyson Williams drove toward his mother's hospital, carrying hope in a bag that had once held garden tools, purchased with money that would either save a life or destroy his own. The knock came at 6:47 a.m., exactly 72 hours after the robbery. Tyson had been expecting it, dreading it, rehearsing for it, but when the sound of knuckles against wood finally echoed through his house, his heart still hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He had spent the weekend in a strange state of suspended animation. Saturday morning, he had driven to the hospital and quietly arranged for his mother's treatment. The oncologist, Dr. Reeves, had been surprised but professional when Tyson produced a cashier's check for the full amount. He had asked no questions about the sudden change in financial circumstances, simply scheduled the first round of experimental therapy for the following week. Eleanor Williams had cried when he told her, not the quiet, dignified tears she had shed when first diagnosed, but deep, body-shaking sobs of relief and gratitude. She had held his face in her weathered hands and whispered, "I don't know how you did this, baby, but thank you. Thank you for giving me more time." Those words had sustained him through the guilt that gnawed at his insides like acid. Every time he looked at Sarah, every time Maya and Lily climbed into his lap for bedtime stories, every time his phone rang and his heart stopped, thinking it might be the police, through all of it, he held onto his mother's words and the knowledge that she would live. But now, as the knock came again, more insistent this time, Tyson knew his borrowed time had run out. He opened the door to find Detective Raymond Costa standing on his porch, flanked by two uniformed officers. Costa was a good man, someone Tyson had coached alongside in Little League, whose daughter had dated Tyson's nephew briefly in high school. They had shared beers at community gatherings, complained about property taxes, argued good-naturedly about football teams. "Morning, Tyson," Costa said, his voice carefully neutral. "Mind if we come in for a few minutes?" Of course. Tyson's voice sounded normal to his own ears, though his hands trembled as he stepped aside. "Coffee. This isn't a social call, Ty." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs, having heard voices. She was still in her pajamas, her hair pulled back in a messy bun she always wore to bed. The sight of 3 police officers in her living room sent confusion across her features, followed quickly by the dawning horror of understanding. "Tyson Williams," Costa said formally, "you're under arrest for armed robbery of the Riverside Community Bank. You have the right to remain silent." The Miranda rights washed over him like white noise. Tyson watched Sarah's face crumble as the words sank in. Armed robbery. Her husband, the man she had trusted with her heart, her children, her future, was a criminal. "There's been a mistake," she said, coming down the stairs, her voice high and strained. Tyson wouldn't, he couldn't. "Ma'am, I need you to step back," one of the uniformed officers said gently. "Daddy." Maya's small voice came from the top of the stairs. Both girls stood there in their matching butterfly pajamas, rubbing sleep from their eyes, trying to understand why strangers were in their house, why Mommy was crying, why men in uniforms were putting metal bracelets on their father's wrists. The handcuffs clicked into place with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire house. Tyson looked up at his daughters, memorizing their faces, knowing that this moment would divide their childhood into before and after. "It's going to be okay," he called to them, the lie burning his throat. "Daddy has to go away for a little while, but it's going to be okay." "Don't talk to anyone without a lawyer," Sarah said through her tears, her teacher's instincts kicking in even as her world collapsed. "Tyson, don't say anything until you have a lawyer." As they led him toward the door, Tyson caught sight of his neighbor, Bill Morrison, watering his garden with mechanical precision while obviously straining to hear every word. Mrs. Patterson stood on her porch across the street, her hand pressed to her mouth in shock. Down the block, other neighbors had emerged from their houses, drawn by the commotion and the flashing red and blue lights of the police cars. This was how news traveled in Riverside, not through social media or local news, but through kitchen windows and back fence conversations. By noon, everyone would know that Tyson Williams, the man who had organized their block parties and shoveled their driveways, had robbed their bank. The ride to the police station passed in silence. Costa sat in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at Tyson with something that looked like disappointment mixed with professional obligation. These weren't strangers processing a criminal. This was a community turning against one of its own. At the station, they processed him with efficient professionalism. Fingerprints, photographs, property inventory. The canvas bag sat on the evidence table, looking smaller and more pathetic than it had 3 days ago. Most of the money was still there. Tyson had only spent what was necessary for his mother's treatment. "You want to tell me about it?" Costa asked when they were finally alone in the interview room. Tyson stared at his hands, still seeing the faint impressions left by the handcuffs. "I want a lawyer." "Come on, Ty. We've known each other for 15 years. You've got a clean record. You're respected in the community. Judge might go easier on you if you cooperate." "I said I want a lawyer." Costa leaned back in his chair, studying Tyson's face. "Janet Morrison identified you. Said she knew it was you even with the mask. Something about your build, the way you moved. You've been in that bank 100 times, Ty. She's seen you interact with your kids, watched you help elderly customers with their deposits. She said you were gentle, even while robbing the place. Said you seemed more scared than she was." The words cut deeper than any accusation of violence could have. Janet Morrison, who had approved his business loan, who had congratulated him when the twins were born, had recognized something essentially him even in the worst moment of his life. "The money's mostly still here," Costa continued. That tells me this wasn't about greed. Someone as smart as you wouldn't rob his own neighborhood bank unless he was desperate. What happened, Ty? What drove you to this? Tyson wanted to tell him, wanted to explain about his mother, about the insurance denial, about the impossible choice between watching her die and destroying his family's future. But Sarah's words echoed in his mind. Don't say anything until you have a lawyer. The public defender who arrived 3 hours later was a tired-looking woman named Patricia Hernandez. She was competent but overworked, carrying a briefcase stuffed with cases that probably seemed more clear-cut than Tyson's. She listened to his story without judgment, took notes in neat handwriting, and delivered the verdict he already knew was coming. With the evidence they have, we're looking at a plea bargain, she said. Armed robbery carries a mandatory minimum, but given your clean record and the fact that no one was hurt, we might be able to negotiate something reasonable. How reasonable? 3 to 5 years, probably. Maybe less with good behavior. 3 to 5 years. Maya and Lily would be teenagers when he got out. His mother might not live to see his release. His business would be gone, his reputation destroyed, his family left to navigate the shame and financial ruin he had created while trying to prevent different kinds of ruin. As he sat in his cell that night, listening to the sounds of the jail settling around him, Tyson realized he had been naive to think he could control the consequences of his actions. He had imagined himself as a hero in his own story, a man willing to sacrifice anything to save his mother. Instead, he had become something else entirely, a cautionary tale about how quickly love could transform into destruction, about how a single desperate decision could unravel an entire life. Outside his window, Riverside was learning to see him differently. The man they had trusted was gone, replaced by someone they no longer recognized. And in trying to save one family member, he had condemned the rest of his family to carry the weight of his choices for years to come. The Riverside Community Center had never hosted anything like this. Built in 1987 for potluck dinners and town council meetings, it now groaned under the weight of 300 angry voices, all focused on one man's fall from grace. Folding chairs arranged in neat rows faced a small stage where Mayor Patricia Hendricks stood behind a microphone, trying to maintain order as the crowd's fury threatened to boil over. "Let's keep this civil," she called out, her voice barely audible above the din. "Everyone will have a chance to speak." In the third row, Sarah Williams sat with her arms wrapped around Maya and Lily, trying to shield them from the hostile stares and whispered comments that followed them everywhere now. She had debated coming to this community meeting, knowing it would be painful, but Tyson's arrest had turned her family into pariahs overnight. The girls needed to see that their mother wouldn't hide, wouldn't let shame drive them from their home. "I trusted that man with my life savings," shouted Harold Martinez from the back of the room. At 73, Harold had been banking at Riverside Community for 40 years, and the robbery had shaken his faith in everything he thought he knew about his neighbors. How do we know there aren't others? How do we know who we can trust anymore? A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. These were people who had lived their entire lives in Riverside, where everyone knew everyone, where children played unsupervised in neighborhood streets, where front doors remained unlocked and neighbors borrowed tools without asking. Tyson's crime hadn't just violated a bank security. It had shattered their sense of safety in their own community. "The bank will recover the money," said Janet Morrison, standing near the front with her arms crossed. Her usual warmth had been replaced by a hard edge that made her almost unrecognizable. "But how do we recover our peace of mind? How do we explain to our children that someone we all trusted could do something like this?" Linda Patterson, the teller who had trembled while opening the vault, stood up slowly. Her voice shook as she addressed the room. "I keep thinking about that morning, about how his hands were shaking just as much as mine, about how he said he didn't want to hurt anyone." She paused, wiping tears from her cheeks. "I've known Tyson Williams for 10 years. My kids played with his kids. He helped me move when my husband left. The man who robbed our bank, I don't know who that was." From her seat, Sarah felt the weight of 300 stares. Some held anger, others confusion, but most carried a mixture of both. These people had trusted her family. They had hired Tyson's landscaping services, invited the Williams family to birthday parties, cheered for Maya and Lily at soccer games. Now, they were trying to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the headlines screaming from the local newspaper. Local businessman robs community bank. "What about his family?" called out Mrs. Chun from the middle section. Her voice carried a note of sympathy that seemed to surprise even her. "Those little girls didn't do anything wrong. Are we going to punish them for their father's choices?" The question hung in the air, creating an uncomfortable silence. Sarah felt Maya shift against her side, and she looked down to see her daughter listening intently to every word. At 7 years old, Maya was old enough to understand that something terrible had happened, but too young to grasp the complexity of adult desperation that had driven her father to his breaking point. "Nobody wants to hurt the children," Mayor Hendricks said carefully. "But we also can't ignore what's happened. This crime has damaged our community's reputation. Property values are already starting to drop. The regional news picked up the story. We're being portrayed as a place where neighbors can't trust neighbors." Tom Bradley, who owned the hardware store next to Tyson's office, stood up with visible reluctance. "I've been thinking about this for days," he said, his voice heavy with conflict. "Tyson was one of my best customers. Always paid on time. Always treated my employees with respect. But last month, he came in asking about security systems for his house. Said he was worried about break-ins. Now I wonder, was he planning this even then?" The speculation rippled through the crowd, like wildfire. Everyone began re-examining their recent interactions with Tyson, looking for signs they had missed, clues that might have predicted this betrayal. Mrs. Patterson remembered him seeming distracted when he shoveled her driveway. The mailman recalled Tyson checking his mail more frequently than usual. Even casual conversations were dissected for hidden meanings. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," said Dr. Rebecca Santos, who had been one of Tyson's tellers that morning. She stood near the back, her newborn baby sleeping in a carrier against her chest. "We're turning on each other. We're looking for conspiracies and signs that probably never existed. Tyson Williams made a terrible choice, but that doesn't mean we all need to become suspicious of everyone around us." Her words sparked a heated debate between those calling for increased security and vigilance, and others arguing for forgiveness and community healing. Voices rose and tempers flared as the meeting devolved into exactly the kind of division that crimes like this always created in small communities. "Enough!" The voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Everyone turned to see Marcus Williams standing by the side door, his face flushed with anger and grief. As Tyson's older brother, he had become the reluctant spokesman for a family that never wanted to be in the spotlight. "You want to know why he did it?" Marcus continued, stepping into the main aisle. "My mother is dying. Cancer. The insurance company denied coverage for the treatment that might save her life. My brother, who spent his entire adult life taking care of everyone else, was told to watch the most important person in his world die because he didn't have enough money to fight for her." The room fell silent. Sarah closed her eyes, knowing that Tyson had asked his family not to use his mother's illness as an excuse for his actions. He had insisted that nothing justified what he had done, that he alone was responsible for his choices. But Marcus, watching his brother's family ostracized and his business destroyed, had reached his own breaking point. "That doesn't excuse what he did," Marcus continued, his voice breaking. "Tyson knows that. He's sitting in jail right now, knowing he destroyed everything he worked for, everything he loved, because he couldn't find another way to save the woman who sacrificed everything for us." "Then he should have asked for help," called out someone from the back. "This community would have rallied around him if we had known." "Would you have?" Marcus shot back. "Would you have mortgaged your homes, emptied your savings, to pay for an experimental treatment that might not even work? Or would you have offered prayers and casseroles and told him to accept God's will?" The question hung in the air unanswered, because everyone in that room knew the truth. They would have organized fundraisers, held bake sales, maybe raised $10,000 or $20,000 through the generosity of a caring community. But $200,000 for an unproven treatment? That kind of money was beyond what neighbors could provide, no matter how much they cared. As Marcus stormed out, leaving behind a room full of people grappling with uncomfortable truths about the limits of community support. Sarah stood slowly. Every eye in the room turned to her as she guided Maya and Lily toward the exit. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence, "I didn't know either. I married a man who thought he had to carry every burden alone, who believed asking for help was a sign of weakness. I'm not asking you to forgive him, or to forget what he did. But maybe, before you decide who he really was, remember that desperation can turn any of us into someone we don't recognize." As the Williams family walked out into the parking lot, the community center erupted in arguments behind them. Some voices called for compassion, others demanded accountability. The storm that Tyson's actions had unleashed was far from over, and Sarah realized that regardless of what happened to her husband, she would be fighting to rebuild their lives in a town that no longer knew whether to see them as victims or accomplices in their own destruction. The real tragedy, she thought as she buckled her daughters into their car seats, wasn't just that a good man had made a terrible choice. It was that his choice had forced everyone around him to examine the dark spaces in their own hearts, the places where love and fear lived so close together that sometimes it became impossible to tell them apart. 2 years and 4 months after the robbery, Tyson Williams walked through the gates of Millbrook Correctional Facility, carrying everything he owned in a paper bag. The morning sun felt different against his skin after 28 months in a cell, sharper somehow, more precious. His brother Marcus waited by the curb in the same pickup truck Tyson had driven to commit his crime, its blue paint now faded and its engine rattling with age. "How does it feel?" Marcus asked as they pulled away from the prison. "Terrifying," Tyson answered honestly, watching the razor wire disappear in the side mirror. "I have no idea what I'm walking back into." The truth was more complicated than fear. Prison had given him something he never expected: perspective. Surrounded by men who had made far worse choices for far worse reasons, he had been forced to confront the reality of what he had done without the luxury of justifying it through love for his mother. The guilt hadn't diminished, but it had been joined by something else, a deep understanding of how much damage a single desperate decision could cause. His mother had survived. The experimental treatment, paid for with stolen money, had bought her 18 additional months of life. She had died peacefully at home the previous spring, surrounded by family, having seen both her granddaughters learn to ride bicycles and start playing piano. In her final weeks, she had visited Tyson every Sunday, refusing to let him apologize for what he had done. "You saved my life," she had whispered during their last conversation. "I got to see Maya lose her first tooth. I got to teach Lily how to bake cookies. That time was worth everything, baby. Everything." Now, driving through the familiar streets of Riverside, Tyson wondered if the cost had been worth it to everyone else. The house looked smaller than he remembered. Sarah had planted new flowers along the front walkway, bright yellow marigolds that hadn't been there before his arrest. She met him at the door with a hesitant smile that carried 2 years of accumulated pain and growth. "The girls are at school," she said, leading him inside. "I thought we should talk first." The interior had changed too. New furniture replaced pieces that had been sold to pay legal fees. Family photos now included pictures taken during prison visits, awkward shots of him in orange jumpsuit, sitting beside his daughters, who had grown taller and more serious during his absence. "I know this is strange," Sarah continued, settling onto the couch across from where he stood uncertainly. "We've been pen pals for 2 years, but living together again, that's different." During his incarceration, Sarah had written him 3 letters every week. She had told him about Maya's struggles with math, Lily's obsession with horses, the whispered comments that still followed them at the grocery store. She had also written about her own journey, the therapy sessions that helped her understand her anger, the support group for families of incarcerated people, the slow process of rebuilding her identity as something other than the bank robber's wife. "Are we going to make it?" Tyson asked, sitting carefully on the edge of the chair, afraid to assume too much comfort too soon. "I don't know," she answered with the honesty that had sustained their relationship through letters and supervised visits. "I love you, Ty. I never stopped loving you. But trust, that's harder." I keep wondering what else you might do if you get desperate again. What other decisions you might make without talking to me first?" They were interrupted by the sound of the school bus stopping outside. Through the window, Tyson watched his daughters climb down the steps, lunchboxes in hand, looking older than their 9 years. Maya had inherited Sarah's thoughtful nature and had become fiercely protective of her mother during Tyson's absence. Lily remained a family optimist, but her smile now carried a wariness that broke his heart. "Daddy." Maya's voice was uncertain as she stepped through the front door and saw him sitting in their living room. "Hey, sweetheart." The reunion was awkward in the way that important moments often are. The girls had visited him regularly, but seeing him in civilian clothes in their home required a mental adjustment that took several minutes of stilted conversation and careful hugs. "Are you going to leave again?" Lily asked with the directness of childhood. "No, baby. I'm home now. For good." "Promise." Tyson looked at Sarah, who nodded slightly, and then back at his daughter. "I promise." That afternoon, while Sarah took the girls to soccer practice, Tyson walked downtown to face the community he had betrayed. Riverside had changed in subtle ways during his absence. The bank had installed new security cameras and a guard station. Several businesses had added their own security measures, as if his crime had awakened everyone to previously unconsidered vulnerabilities. The hardware store was his first stop. Tom Bradley looked up from his inventory sheets, his expression cycling through surprise, discomfort, and finally, reluctant civility. "Tyson, heard you were getting out today." "Tom." He paused, studying the man who had once been a friend and business partner. "I know I can't just walk back in here and expect things to be the same. I wanted to apologize face to face for what I put this community through." Tom set down his clipboard, his weathered hands showing the strain of running a business during economically uncertain times. "You know, after it happened, I kept thinking about all the times you came in here, wondering if I missed something, some sign that you were planning that." "You didn't miss anything," Tyson said. "The planning happened in about 72 hours. Before that, I was just a desperate man who hadn't figured out how desperate he really was." "Your mom." "My mom's death doesn't excuse what I did. Nothing does. But I want you to know that every day for the last 2 years, I've thought about the people I hurt. You, Janet, Linda, Rebecca. Everyone who trusted me." Tom studied him for a long moment, then reached under the counter and pulled out a worn manila envelope. "This came for you about 6 months ago, from some construction company upstate. Figured it might be important." The envelope contained a job offer. Patterson Construction, owned by a distant relative of Mrs. Patterson from across the street, was expanding and needed experienced project managers. The pay was decent, the work honest, and most importantly, it was far enough from Riverside that Tyson's reputation wouldn't follow him. "You thinking about taking it?" Tom asked. "I don't know. Sarah's got her teaching job here. The girls have friends, stability. Running away feels like abandoning them all over again. Sometimes staying takes more courage than leaving," Tom said, then added with grudging respect, "but sometimes leaving is the braver choice too." Over the following weeks, Tyson threw himself into the delicate work of rebuilding relationships. He volunteered at the community center, cleaning and doing maintenance work without pay. He attended town council meetings, sitting in the back row and listening to discussions about budget shortfalls and infrastructure needs. He didn't speak, didn't draw attention to himself, but his presence became a familiar constant. The real test came on a Saturday morning when old Mrs. Patterson fell on her icy driveway. Tyson was walking past, heading to his volunteer shift at the center, when he heard her cry for help. Without thinking, he rushed to assist her, helping her to her feet and checking for injuries. "Thank you, dear," she said, recognizing him with a mixture of gratitude and complicated emotions. "You always were good in a crisis." The comment stung because it was both true and false. He had been good in small crises, helping neighbors with flat tires, organizing emergency childcare when someone's babysitter canceled, rallying the community after storm damage. But when faced with the biggest crisis of his life, he had chosen a path that created even bigger crises for everyone around him. As winter turned to spring, Something began to shift in Riverside's relationship with Tyson Williams. Not forgiveness exactly, but a weary recognition that he was genuinely trying to make amends. Some residents remained hostile. Harold Martinez crossed the street rather than walk past him, and several former clients made it clear that his landscaping services were no longer welcome. But others began to thaw. Dr. Santos, who had been in the bank that morning, approached him after a town council meeting. "My husband and I have been talking," she said. "We're thinking about starting a crisis support fund for families facing medical emergencies. Something that might prevent situations like yours from happening again." The initiative grew slowly but steadily. Local churches contributed. The bank, despite everything, made a substantial donation. Even some of Tyson's former clients, perhaps feeling guilty about their harsh rejection of him, wrote checks to support families in medical crisis. Tyson wasn't allowed to be directly involved. His presence would have been too controversial, but he watched from the sidelines as Riverside created something positive from the ashes of his destruction. The fund wouldn't have prevented his mother's illness, but it might spare other families from facing the same impossible choice between financial ruin and watching loved ones die. The job offer from Patterson Construction remained on his kitchen table, a constant reminder of the choice he needed to make: stay and continue the slow work of rebuilding trust, or leave and give his family a fresh start somewhere his mistakes wouldn't define their future. The decision came unexpectedly on a humid Tuesday evening in June. Maya was struggling with a math problem at the kitchen table, while Lily practiced piano in the living room. Sarah was grading papers at the counter, and for a moment, everything felt almost normal. "Daddy," Maya said, looking up from her homework, "Jessica's mom said you're a bad man. Is that true?" The question hit him like a physical blow. At 9 years old, his daughter was old enough to hear playground whispers, but too young to understand the complex circumstances that had led to his choices. "I did a bad thing," he said carefully, sitting down beside her. "A very bad thing that hurt people I cared about. Does that make me a bad man?" "I don't know, sweetheart. I'm trying to be better." "But you saved Grandma," Lily called from the living room, having overheard the conversation. "That wasn't bad." "Saving Grandma was good," Tyson agreed. "But the way I did it was wrong. Sometimes people do the right thing for the wrong reasons, or the wrong thing for the right reasons. Life is more complicated than good and bad." That night, after the girls were asleep, Tyson sat on the front porch with Sarah, watching fireflies dance in the humid air. The envelope from Patterson Construction lay on the table between them. "What do you want to do?" Sarah asked. "I want to stay," he said. "I want to keep trying to make things right here. But I also want our girls to grow up without carrying the weight of what I did. I want you to be able to walk into the grocery store without people whispering." "The whispering has gotten better," Sarah said. "And Maya and Lily, they're stronger than we give them credit for. They're learning that families stick together even when things get difficult." "Are we sticking together?" Tyson asked. "Really?" Sarah reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand. Her wedding ring, which she had continued wearing throughout his incarceration, caught the light from their porch lamp. "We're trying," she said. "Some days are harder than others. Some days I still get angry about the choice you made without consulting me. But we're trying, and that's something." The next morning, Tyson walked to the post office and mailed a letter declining the job offer. He stopped by Dr. Santos's office and volunteered to do landscaping work for the Crisis Support Fund's fundraising events. He picked up applications for community college courses in business management, thinking about building legitimate skills for legitimate work. As he walked home through the streets of Riverside, past the bank where he had destroyed his old life, past the houses of neighbors who were slowly learning to see him as something more complex than simply a criminal, Tyson realized that redemption wasn't a destination. It was a daily choice, made fresh each morning, to do better than the day before. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Mom would be proud of you." Tyson smiled, thinking about his mother's final words to him, about the time he had given her, about the cost that time had carried for everyone he loved. She had been right that those extra months were precious beyond measure. But he was learning that the real measure of those months wasn't just in the memories they had created, but in how he chose to honor them by becoming the man she had always believed he could be. The road ahead remained uncertain, marked by the ongoing work of rebuilding trust and teaching his daughters that people could change, that mistakes didn't have to define entire lives. But for the first time since that desperate morning, when he had put on a ski mask and walked into Riverside Community Bank, Tyson Williams felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope for the future, earned one difficult choice at a time.